Well, welcome back, folks, to a little more remote learning here with Maine Fish and Wildlife. If you're watching this, you've logged into Google Classroom and found today's video. Let's jump right in. We're going to talk about white-tailed deer today. We're going to do a harvest analysis assignment, our first of three. You don't necessarily need to take notes on this. I'm not going to ask you specific questions on specific species on tests and things like that. This is just to help get us familiarized with white-tailed deer, Maine's #1 and North America's #1 game species, before we take a look at our harvest analysis and think about the way deer are distributed throughout the state and how we manage them through Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. So let's talk deer today here. Our white-tailed deer in Maine are some of the largest whitetails in the world. Our bucks, adult weight, can exceed 300 pounds live, and females are considerably smaller. There's a good example of sexual dimorphism, and obviously adult males, bucks, grow those antlers. Let's key in, though, on this idea of large deer here in Maine. This is a concept called Bergman's rule, which is identified and kind of points out that many species that exist across large landscapes, the creatures at the far northern extent of the range tend to be larger than the creatures at the southern extent of the range, and this is certainly the case with deer. Our deer here in Maine are at the extreme northern limit of where white-tailed deer can survive due to harsh winters and food availability, and because of this, they have very large bodies, and the science behind this tells us that the bigger and rounder you are, the better you are at maintaining or retaining body heat. That's called surface area to volume ratio. So we see this with people. I'm kind of scrawny, and I get cold real easy up here in Maine. I tend to bundle up, and everybody's always making fun of me for wearing so many layers. And we all kind of know somebody that might be a little bigger and rounder, big muscly dudes that are always walking around outside with a t-shirt and shorts on and acting like it's not that cold. They may indeed not be that cold because of their surface area to volume ratio. So through natural selection, we've seen this as well. Let's take a look here at the smallest subspecies of deer in North America. They are coincidentally at the southern edge of their range, and these are key deer. These are found down in the Florida Keys, and they are tiny. We're talking full-grown adult deer. Like, that's a big giant buck right there. Full-grown adult male deer. He's the size of our fawns here in Maine. And we see that progression. The further south we go in the U.S., the smaller the deer become, and the key deer have really taken that to an extreme. These are an endangered subspecies of white-tailed deer. They're only found on a couple of islands in the Florida Keys, and they've really been encroached upon by human development down there, and the lack of fresh water really limits where they can be found. But there's a couple of full-grown adult doe key deer. Those aren't babies. Those are adult key deer. So that's just a really good example of that Bergman's rule, where the deer becomes smaller as we go south and larger as we go north. So just kind of interesting stuff about the size of our deer here in Maine. Habitat-wise, deer are very rarely found away from edge habitat, meaning it's not always the edge of a field. It could be just the edge of two habitats. And deer hunters in the class will tell you that we very often set up in areas that are considered edge. Whether you realize it or not, we tend to see deer around the edges of swamps, where swamps meet hardwoods or softwoods, the edges of fields. Deer are classic edge creatures. That's where they find their food and the availability to flee to cover. So the next time you're sitting out there in the woods looking for deer, think about, am I near an edge? And often you are. That's just deer habitat. Diet-wise, deer are herbivores. Their diet changes throughout the year. In the spring and summer, they're feeding on herbaceous plants, and they're browsers, meaning they're going to eat leaves from branches up off the ground. Grazers are going to eat plants right off the ground. Deer tend to browse. In the fall, they switch to mast, those acorns and beech nuts and apples and things like that. They'll eat mushrooms and fungi as well. And then in the winter, they're really going to key in on buds. So on this slide here, you're seeing a picture of a red maple branch that's been browsed by a deer. They nip the buds off of those branches. And they'll eat cedar and some balsam fir and stuff when they're really, really hungry in the wintertime. But for the most part, they kind of starve their way through the winter and live off their fat stores. We talked about antlers the other day. And antlers are these amazing structures. They grow and shed every year. They're made of bone, and they're generally found only on male deer. But we talked about how female deer from time to time can grow antlers, and that's why in Maine we regulate harvest by calling it an antlered deer and not a male deer. So let's take a look at some antler growth progression here. In the upper right-hand corner, you can see that's late June. You can see those velvet antlers just peeking up above that buck's ears. And down in the lower right-hand corner, we've got by late August, just about fully developed set of antlers underneath velvet there. They're still they're hardening into bone, still kind of cartilaginous, a lot of blood flow to them still. And then there's a buck my brother got a few years ago in November. You can see that the velvet has been shed and those antlers have hardened into solid bone. Deer grow antlers as a secondary sexual characteristic to attract and fight for mates. They reproduce through a breeding season we're going to talk about in a minute in November through early December. Those fawns, that's timed importantly so that the fawns are born late May and early June, just as temperatures are warming enough for them to survive and there's plenty of food available for mom to provide nutritious milk. They'll nurse for 5 to 6 months, and they're ready for survival by the following November, but many of them will stick with mom all the way into the next springtime. If we look here, that's the number one defense of a young white-tailed deer, a fawn. For the first month or two, they're just going to lay motionless on the forest floor, and they're pretty well camouflaged. They have very little scent, and that's their number one defense. And you'll see in another couple months, the state will start their campaign. They call it, "If You Care, Leave Them There." And this is important for all of us in class to understand. If you find a little deer like that out in a field or in the woods, the instinct that we all have is, oh no, this deer's been abandoned, I need to help it. And all across the state every year, people grab a hold of those things and attempt to quote unquote rescue them. And in reality, you've just kidnapped a deer. Mom really only returns a few times a day to nurse the fawn, and most of the fawn's time is spent alone, laying there motionless to hide from predators. So when you stumble across one, if you care, leave it there, because mom's coming back. It has not been abandoned. As we said, that breeding season for the deer, the term we use for that is the rut. And does only come into heat for 3 to 5 days during this time, and they all come into heat at the same time so that all the fawns are born at the same time the next spring. It's a great example of what's called predator swamping, so that all those fawns are born at once, so bears and coyotes and things like that can't possibly get them all. But it creates this frantic time when the buck's testosterone levels are spiking, there's fighting, they're making territorial markings, and they become a little more susceptible to harvest because these are deer that were once extremely wary and avoiding people. All of a sudden are out and about in daylight hours looking for does to breed, and they become more susceptible to hunters. During this time, they create those territorial markings, one of which is a scrape, where they paw out the ground and they'll urinate there, and they'll also rub their face on a branch above that scrape on the ground, and they leave all kinds of scent markings. They have little scent glands in their eye sockets that they leave scent with on that licking branch, it's called. And then, as I said, they'll urinate on the ground in that scrape. They also rub their antlers on trees. They have scent glands on their forehead that as they rub that tree, help to leave their scent. And it's all about communicating with other bucks and does in the area silently through scent to convey a message during that rutting period. So here's some examples of some rutting activity. On the left there, we've got a rub that was created by a buck. That's up in the Allagash on one of my hikes into a trout pond, a big old rub on a tree. On the upper right-hand corner there, we've got a picture from Hollis of a nice buck making a scrape. He's standing there in the scrape, and he's using the licking branch above there. He's leaving scent from his face on that branch, and he'll probably urinate right in that scrape on the ground. And then on the bottom right, you can see a small buck there. That's from the Dell out in Arundel, and there's a small buck standing in a scrape, and he's probably about to leave his scent mark, and you can see the licking branch that he's standing underneath. So you ever want to get pictures of bucks on trail camera in the fall, scrapes are a great way to do it. They're just a spot that you know multiple different deer are going to visit. They're all coming in at different times to leave their scent. Kind of a smart way to communicate when you think about it. As a prey species, it doesn't make sense to be roaming the woods, making lots of noise and calling attention to yourself. They communicate very stealthily through that scent. And some cool facts about deer: they've got multiple stomachs that help them break down all the woody food that they eat. That's called being a ruminid. And in order to do that, they chew all this plant material, they swallow it down, and then they go and lay on the ground and rest somewhere, and they hawk up material that they just ate and they chew it again. That's called chewing their cud. They kind of verp and re-chew their food over and over again to help those bacteria in their stomach break down that woody debris. Cows do the same thing, and the next time you see a cow at the fair, like laying on its side, looking like it's chewing on bubble gum, it's actually chewing on its cud, which is kind of gross to think about. Deer are also amazing athletes. They can jump 12-foot fences and run 35 miles per hour. That's pretty amazing stuff. And they are just amazing creatures. As I said, the #1 game animal in North America. Everybody loves to hunt deer. They are good to eat and a cool creature that we're lucky to have on our landscape. So once extremely rare, and nowadays one of our super abundant wildlife species around North America. So our assignment today, we're going to work on our deer harvest analysis, and this is posted under today's topic in Google Classroom. It's going to take you a little bit to do. Just pick your way through it. Not due for a couple days. But I really love these harvest analysis assignments. We'll do one for deer, moose, and bear. And it's our way of kind of looking at how the state of Maine manages deer harvest, and specifically kind of where we find lots of deer in Maine. So let's jump right in here. There's a couple things we're going to do. It says here, step 1, we're going to build a map. And I'll show you how to do that in a second. You're going to color code Maine's harvest map. We're looking at harvest data from 2018. That's the most recent season that we have data from. And then step 2, that should say 2, we're going to answer some analysis questions. And all the answers to these analysis questions are found down here. There's our map we're going to work on. The harvest analysis questions are found down here in this little, one-page write-up about the 2018 season from our deer biologists. You can find all the answers in there. One thing I want to point out before we get into our map is I ask you some questions here about any deer permits. And in Maine, any Maine resident with a hunting license is allowed 1 antlered deer per year. And that's simply because we can afford to harvest a lot of bucks in the state of Maine and really not put that much of a dent in our deer population. When we start harvesting does, that's when we start to really reduce deer numbers. And in some cases, we have goals around the state to actually reduce deer numbers along the coastal southern areas of our state. So the state uses this idea of an any deer permit to allow that to happen. And when you get an any deer permit, it's a lottery system, and you're awarded it for a very specific WMD. And that's the way the state micromanages the deer harvest. So in WMDs with very few deer, they give out no any deer permits, and that's a way of protecting those precious females. In WMDs like the one we're sitting in here in TA at 24, they give out a pile of any deer permits, and the goal there is actually to harvest a lot of females and maybe at least keep the population steady, and then maybe in some cases reduce it. So when I ask you how many permits are issued, you're going to find that in the reading down below. And then we're going to think about harvest goal. One of the things that I really want to point out to you that really blows my mind every year as I look at this, if I scroll down here, spoiler alert, here's one of our answers. They gave out 84,745 any deer permits last year. That allowed a hunter to harvest in either a buck or a doe, okay? 84,000 any deer permits. So if we look, they say 84,745 any deer permits were issued for the 2018 season with the aim of achieving an adult doe harvest of approximately 8,759. That blows my mind. They give out 84,000 permits with a hope of hunters harvesting 8,700. That's 10%. So 90% of those they know will go unfilled. And that's a testament to how hard deer hunting is here in Maine. We have about a 15% success rate. That means 85% of Maine deer hunters will not get a deer on an annual basis. So if you're one of those lucky ones that gets a deer, consider yourself, you should be proud of yourself. You're one of the 15% that's going to have success that year. So what a roll of the dice that is to give out 84,000 permits knowing, based on previous year's success rates, they're going to give out 84,000 permits and hope that about 8,759 adult does are harvested. And 2018 was one of the first years in memory that they actually exceeded it. They say the actual doe harvest was about 9,659. So they were over the harvest goal by about 1,000. Which very rarely happens. Usually they have a tough time reaching the goal. So just really interesting stuff. You can find all the answers to those reading questions in this report from the state. It's really cool stuff to read and think about. And if you have any questions as you work through this assignment, please email me. I'm at home. I'm ready to answer any questions and help you out. This YouTube video is just meant as a guide to get you started. I want to show you how to do the map here next. As we look here, it says, use the map provided on the next page to color code each town by the number of deer harvested there. Use the key below to determine which color to use in each town. So there's a color coding system here. If a town harvests more than 200 deer, we're going to color it red. If it's 150 to 199, we'll go orange. 100 to 149, we'll go yellow. Green for 50 to 99. And then if it's 49 or less, we're going to color it blue. All right, let me show you how to do this. And you can do this with your finger really easily on the screen. I would strongly suggest doing this in Notability, which is where I'm working on this now. So I like to use the highlighter option, and I'm going to start with the easiest ones here. Let's see. Yep, that's about right. I'm going to start with all the towns that are below 49 deer, and this is going to seem like it'll take you forever. It really won't. And you don't have to be an artist here. I'm literally just going to kind of scribble in all these towns. Look at northern Maine up here. All these towns, you can just put a dot over each of these. Boom, boom, boom. Do you notice there's some townships up here in northern Maine in the northwest part of the state that have 0 deer harvested? We're talking 1, 2. We have a month-long firearm season. And we go an entire month up here, and not a single person will get a deer in a lot of these townships. It's crazy to think about. And I'm just clicking along here really quickly, filling in these towns, and you could do this with your finger, no problem. Just literally tapping on these and leaving a dot. And what we're creating is a really cool scatter plot here eventually that'll begin to fill in. Ooh, Ashland, 83 deer. So we'll hold off on blue there. That one's going to be a different color. So I'm coming along here. These are all towns that are 49 deer or less. Okay? So let's skip and do our next color. Let's go up and look at our assignment here. I can't remember. I want to say it's green. Let's see. Yeah, green is going to be 50 to 99. So maybe I'll do green here, and then I think you'll get the gist of it. And if you have any questions, you can certainly reach out and ask anytime. So I'm looking for towns that are between 50 and 99. There's Abbott, 62 deer. Let's see. Ooh, Kingfield right at 50, and New Portland. Okay, now we're getting into some areas that are kind of green parts of the state. Let's see, 81 and 66 and 51, 55 down here in Smithfield. All right, 81, 54, 79. You get the gist of what I'm doing here. I'm just going along in Hudson, 55. I'm identifying towns that are somewhere between 50 and 99 deer harvested, and I'm just putting in dots. And over time, you're going to build this really cool color-coded map that's going to show you hotspots around the state where we have lots of deer harvested. So it's to the naked eye, you can see how barren it is up there in northern Maine, where the extreme winters make deer survival really tricky. And we're talking really remote areas that are hard to access with not that many people around. If you contrast that down here with southwestern Maine, great deer habitat, winters that are far less harsh, and lots of people, meaning lots of hunters too. We've got some towns that produce a lot of deer. Most in the state, York at 247. Wells is over 200. Saco at 124. Look at Buxton, 219. Standish, my old stomping grounds, 194. But there's another little pocket of deer activity of high harvest up here in central Maine. If we come up here, where are we looking? Oh, yeah, right in this corner right here, just west of Bangor. In District 17, we have towns like St. Albans, 244, Corinna, 235. Dover Foxcroft is always a great area, 121. So the Exeter, 191. These are little towns here in central Maine that produce a lot of deer because they have great deer habitat and lots of hunters. It's kind of a two-pronged approach there. You got to think about, this is a harvest map, so it requires hunters to harvest as well as lots of deer to get these towns that have high numbers. Where's that? 203. Oh, Turner, good town there, over 200. Auburn, 228. So we're going to see a definite kind of trend to southwestern Maine, with southwestern and central Maine are going to have our highest harvest totals. And this is always interesting if you've got a camp around the state or a town that you like to go to check the deer harvest in there and see how many deer are being turned in those areas. So work on that map. This is going to take you 15 minutes or so to fill in each of those and do your little dot highlighter mark over each town, and you'll get a really cool color-coded map when all is said and done. You got your reading questions that you can get the information right out of here on. And then the last thing that we're going to work on here with this assignment is a very easy, straightforward pie graph. And it says, use the data from the second page of the harvest report to create a pie graph comparing the 2018 Maine Deer Harvest methods. It says be sure to include the harvest totals from archery, youth day, regular firearms, and muzzleloader. Those are all the different seasons we have here in Maine to harvest deer. We're talking there's a month-long statewide archery season and a special archery season along the coast called expanded archery. There's a youth day where kids under 16 and under 16 can get out hunting with an adult. A special Saturday before the regular firearm season when any Maine resident can get out there with any kind of firearm and deer hunt. And then finally, there's a 2-week muzzleloader season here in southern Maine, and it's 1 week in northern Maine, and those are with more primitive firearms, the muzzleloaders that have to be loaded through the muzzle, one shot at a time. So to build this pie graph, we're going to use pages, and we've all got pages on our iPads. We built pie graph right at the beginning of class for our essay. I'm going to create a new document, and let's see, I'll use a landscape here. We want to add a graph. We want to add a pie graph, and with this pie graph, we're going to list the harvest types instead of months out of the year. So I'm going to go archery. We will say youth day, regular firearms, and muzzleloader. Is that how they spell it? Let's see. Let's go back to our assignment here. Yep, muzzle loader. Oh, yeah. Okay. So let's go back here. We'll fix this. So we can delete these other two categories. I'm going to click on the top color code here and delete that. And I'm also going to delete September. We only need 4 categories here. Now your data you're going to find right in the assignment in the reading, and I'll show you where. It's in a paragraph. Let's see. It lists harvest by type. Let's see if we can find this. Oh, we got low battery going here. We're going to have to plug her in. All right, so I'm just skimming through here. We're looking for harvest by type, by season. Let's see. Statewide temperatures. Here we go. A total of 27,245 deer were harvested during the general firearms season. So I'm going to go 27,245. Back at 27,245. If we go back to our information, additionally, 2,168 deer were harvested during the combined archery season. So archery is 2,168. Archery 2,168. Let's see. 1,030 on youth day. 1,030 on youth day. And then muzzleloader, 2,003 during muzzleloader. 2,003. So if I hit done here, what I'm going to see is an overwhelming kind of picture of what's going on with Maine's deer harvest. We can see 84% of our deer are harvested through that month-long regular firearm season, and I'll leave it up to you guys to reflect on why. Let's click here, scroll down. I want to see your answers on what you think is going on there. And we'll move our key down to the bottom here, and don't forget we need to add a title to this graph. To do that, I'm going to hit the paintbrush, and I'm going to go title, turn that on. And the last thing we want to do is edit this title. I can double click on it, and we're going to call this Maine, we got to put in the date. Let's put in 2018 Maine Deer Harvest by Method. Good stuff. How's that for a graph? When you're all done there, you can copy and paste that graph into Notability. If I go here, I can copy, and then if I go back to Notability, I can go right up here. And a lot of kids have trouble copy and pasting. Remember, you need to be in the scissors option up there. If I press and hold, I can paste my image in there, and boom. You can also do a screenshot of an image. But yeah, there you go. Pretty good stuff. We've got our pie graph in there. You can work on your state map. So when I collect this, I'm looking to see your map complete, your pie graph done, and you've got your analysis questions answered there. And again, you got 2 days to work on this, so take your time. Thank you for logging in today on this remote learning. I can't wait to get you guys back in the classroom and specifically get you out in the woods. It's going to be warm here pretty soon, and we're going to start getting outside as we start thinking about amphibians and reptiles in our next unit. So looking forward to getting you guys back, and I really appreciate your hard work with the remote learning. As always, if you have any questions, shoot me an email. I'm home. I'm ready to answer them, and I'm here to help. So looking forward to getting you guys back.